Welcome to a special edition of City Lights Live, the virtual home of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravelis, and today's program celebrates the publication of the new book titled The Quantum Revolution, Art, Technology, and Culture. It's by Arthur Kroker and David Cook, together with Lynn Baron. It is published by the University of Toronto Press as part of their Digital Futures series. City Lights has had the pleasure of hosting Arthur Kroker over the course of the last 3 decades. We consider him to be one of the foremost thinkers of the digital age, really kind of following in that trajectory of Marshall McLuhan and going way beyond. And also, thinking a lot about, our relationship to technology and really breaking ground in that kind of, trajectory. I'll be joined today by an amazing group of artists and thinkers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. Numerous dialects were spoken along this peninsula, and many of these people are still with us today. We would like to take this moment to offer respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. I'm occasionally asked, especially by journalists, why City Lights has an interest in issues regarding technology. I mean, we're known as being more of a literary mecca, home to the Beat generation, so it seems puzzling to some. But for us here at City Lights, I mean, it's completely in line with the thinking of the Beats even, and many of the subcultural movements that City Lights has an affinity with. Our interest in the effects of advancing technologies can be traced back to our founder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's formative experiences as a naval commander during World War II. He had the unique and life-altering experience of participating in the D-Day invasion at Normandy, and later, while being reassigned to the Pacific Theater, experienced the aftermath of the carnage at Nagasaki. This was really to have a very profound effect on him. Together with a group of naval officers, Lawrence was able to visit Nagasaki 5 weeks after the atomic bomb had been dropped. He really saw firsthand the horrendous effects of this technology. So he was very much interested in how ecological, sociopolitical, and technological spheres interact. This has really shaped our programming over the years. So the quantum revolution for us here at City Lights offers some of the most brilliantly argued observations of where we're headed as a culture and also as a species. I mean, the book explores in depth the technological vortex that engulfs our lives and that of the planet's trajectory. Through the lens of quantum theory, Arthur Kroker and his colleagues audit our moment of great transition, thinking about the interrelations between the ecological, the sociopolitical, and the philosophical dimensions of our time. The quantum revolution performs a deep analysis of the collision points along the way, the junctures where politics collide with technology, where bodies become hybrid, blending, merging, being pierced, infected, and transformed by the algorithms shaping the surface of the planet. Body trauma, ecological trauma are interrogated with an emphasis on the philosophical underpinnings of what drives bodies to move towards the speed of light. This is a deeply critical inquiry shaped by humanist values. The role of indigenous artists is crucial in the narratives arising in this book. Colonialist and hyper-capitalist reality tunnels are shattered to reveal their obsolescence, and the quantum revolution is an insurgent project at its core, and one that offers us a sense of hope as we venture into the unknown at ever-accelerating speed. So it helps us develop strategies and a more fluid approach to coping with trauma and generating creative outcomes in a time of cataclysm. This is a philosophical workbook, you could almost say. It's intended to engage with you, the reader. So read it, absorb it, utilize the examples of the amazing artists and thinkers contained therein, and craft your own strategies. Become a participant, because after all, the greatest quantum device on the planet is your body and mind. The quantum revolution reminds us of our agency. So a few words about how today's program is going to be structured. Our first session is titled The Quantum Revolution, a Holographic Talk, and it's going to feature Arthur Kroker and Lynn Baron. It is intended as a kind of a skeleton key to offer you not only an overview of the book and some of its ideas, but a sense of how it's all kind of structured and can be useful to us. There will be a focus towards the end of the talk on some of the artists and the wonderful artwork that graces the book. We will take a brief break and then return with the second session. It's titled From Particle Poetics to Wave Aesthetics. It's going to be moderated by Arthur Kroker and myself and feature Rebecca Belmore, Ricardo Dominguez, Jackson Tubears, and Nadia Myre. These are some of the many artists and thinkers whose work permeates the quantum revolution. So before we begin with our first session, I'd like to offer a few words about Arthur and Lynn. Arthur Kroker is an author, editor, and educator and researcher of political science and technology and culture. and serves as director of the Pacific Center for Technology and Culture, located at the University of Victoria, where he has served as professor of political science. He was the editor for the online academic journal Sea Theory, an international journal of theory, technology, and culture. He's the author and co-author and editor of numerous books, which include the books Body Drift, Exits to the Post-Human Future, Technologies of the New Real, amongst others. He makes his home in Victoria, Canada. He's going to be joined by Lynn Baron. Lynn is a photographer, a published poet and painter living in Victoria, Canada. She contributed in major ways to the production of the quantum revolution, both in the areas of aesthetic imagination and writing. So we will be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may make comments and ask questions of Arthur and Lynn. I'd also like to encourage everyone to switch to speaker view to better enhance your viewing experience, and that can be done by the prompt in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom dashboard. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Arthur Kroker and Lynn Baron. Welcome to City Lights.
Thanks, Peter. And I just really want to thank Peter Maravelis from City Lights for organizing today's 2 sessions on our new book, The Quantum Revolution. And, just so deeply appreciate it. And I also just really deeply, deeply appreciate Peter's wonderful introduction, which is truly wonderful. So thank you very much. I also like to say that we're living, from my perspective, in unrelieved, dark, chaotic, uncertain times. But there's sometimes really flashes of light which sparkle in the gathering darkness with the light of lucid thought. And for myself, City Lights Bookstore and everyone working there has always been one of those. So with that, let me just get into the book. The Quantum Revolution, as a book, is conceived as running parallel alongside contemporary society, politics, and culture. It's intended deliberately as a writing style to be energetic and fast and fluid and diverse, and complicated and entangled. But at the same time, in the writing, every sentence in this book and every thought, as much as possible, is also about something else, about listening intently to what an old Canadian philosopher, George Grant, called intimations of deprival. Intimations of, terrible casualties, intimations of those who have been excluded, prohibited, disappeared, and outlawed in contemporary society and culture. And listening intently to intimations of deprival for us tells us, I believe, what's been lost in the coming to be of the technoblast, where I believe today it's not just the earth itself that's heating up, but bodies are actually heating up. They're getting edgy, they're moving faster, they're stressed, we're anxious, creative, energetic. We sometimes fall upwards into euphoria, but we're always taking a deep dive every day into reality. For us, it's what we call a quantum reality. And it's sometimes hard and cold, but it's also spinning fast. It's beautifully complicated. And we're with artificial intelligence, with the appearance of artificial intelligence now, we as a species, I really believe, are just about to jump out of our human skin into a sparkling new world of artifice with all of its dangers and absolutely real possibilities and possibilities. So then, welcome to life in the vortex. Where living today means learning to survive and thrive in a quantum culture that literally implodes all around us and within us, almost like an uncontrolled nuclear reaction. Events are moving fast. When things get hot, people tend, for purposes of survival, often put on hard shells. Marshall McLuhan said that 60 years ago. I believe that when things get really hot, the artists and photographers and writers involved in books like The Quantum Revolution, really do exactly the opposite. They actually expose the soft matter of their bodies and minds to the world, to the technoblast, and they spit away the difference. That's their aesthetic strategy, their way of doing art. And the Quantum Revolution follows their trail closely with its, what we have called with its particle poetics and its way of aesthetics. Now, the writing of the Quantum Revolution was 2 years in the making and involved a really deep collaboration among 2 theorists, myself and David Cook. And it involved a deep collaboration with a photographer as well, Lynn Baron. Now, David and I collaborated previously on 2 other writings, a book called The Postmodern Scene and The Panic Encyclopedia. And we began to collaborate again this time because we both independently found ourselves tracking the same fundamental shift in contemporary reality brought about by advanced technologies when they're slamming into the human condition. I mean, literally debris from the blast of information technology was flying all around us. And our aim was to deepen our own understanding of this new reality. It's a reality which we call quantum reality, which I'll describe in a moment, as quickly emerging. Now for us, technology can never be understood in its own terms, because just as a working principle, technology doesn't have like historical self-consciousness. It can explain technology beautifully, but I don't think that it can understand its own implications itself. It's a will to technology, and it's nothing else. For us to understand technological society, it's far better to turn to artists, because art always has a very sensitive, beautifully complicated perspective on what's happening as we're power washed by seductive, all-pervasive technologies. And what better way to really understand art than to collaborate with an artist, with a photographer and a writer, Lynn Baron, who brings to this project visceral images, wrecked cars and recycle culture, beautiful indigenous murals on plywood planks surrounding a lonely remediation site, graffiti artworks, transient, eloquent, anonymous, photographs of evocative bronze sculptures forming an art project called Hands of Time. And then Lynn also contributed biographically by talking about her own body's experience through a medical crisis itself. Photography of this order definitely and certainly pushes theory to be equally lucid, eloquent, creative, and uncompromising. That is, we hope, the quantum revolution, art, technology, and politics. And there's something else too. The focus of this book squarely is on real material life. It's a book, which is theoretical constructs, complicated thinking, and all that. But the reality of the book is, in fact, it is about the hard and fast nature of contemporary reality itself. We are really interested in what happens when the most sophisticated concepts of science literally begin to pulverize and blast apart the human condition at the speed of social media. For us, the quantum revolution, where technology moves fast, very fast, is everyday life. It's not abstract at all. It is in our bodies. It moves fast with its speed and its slowness, its deep entanglements, its contradictions, its craziness, and all its suffering. I mean, just consider, for example, the last few days as we all commonly ride the quantum wave. In the world of television, which is to say in the real world, no sooner, for example, does Taylor Swift seal the victory of the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 58 with a big hug and a kiss, then there's a terrible mass shooting with a lot of casualties at the Super Bowl celebration in Kansas City. For myself, it's a pure quantum event. It's entangled. There are many different meanings. Everything is still undecidable. It's a random event. It's triumph and it's tragedy. And in that, it's for us, it means that death and sex and violence and seduction quickly become the double sign of this Super Bowl itself. Or consider spin around funding for the war in Ukraine, the contemporary politics today. No sooner does Trump basically encourage Russia to invade NATO countries that he perceives as deadbeats, than a Republican leader of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives leaks the news that the Russians are plotting to blow up American satellites out of the air with nuclear weapons, probably knowing at his heart of hearts that if nothing else, the fear of Netflix going dark and silent will probably arouse the public to support funding for Ukraine. Alexei Navalny this week is murdered in a Russian gulag prison, but immediately rises from the dead in a powerful spectral form by haunting video pre-recorded to be released on news of his own death. Russian autocrats, I believe, forgot the new rule of quantum politics when it comes to martyred heroes, namely that sacrificial martyrs like Alexei Navalny are really never more alive than when they are dead. Navalny's body may be brutally killed. In fact, just following reports just minutes before I began talking today, his body may be literally disappeared by Russian autocrats. Grieving in Russia may be outlawed and young people may be taken brutally away by by place. We've seen the scenes on television. But his vital spirit, and with it the spirit of justice denied by his murder, has been released fully, I believe, into the global collective psyche. Consequences will follow. It's the same thing in Pakistan, where the army bosses in prison, Khan and his wife, have a way of disappearing them from the current election. But they forgot the magic of artificial intelligence. BBC reports that Khan's followers actually used innovative artificial intelligence software to generate his image and voice direct from prison, with the result that his party, against all expectations, easily won the election, with the army bosses left wondering, I think, where did it all go so very wrong? And all the while, the slaughterhouse continues in the streets of Gaza. Leaders look away by talking in carefully staged communications, leaking what they supposedly say critically in private to Israeli right-wing leadership. For myself, it's cynical double talk at the speed of the daily media cycle. Contradictions are everywhere. Stories have no mass, but lots of spin. Stories move fast, fluid, and randomly like a particle blast of neutrinos exploding from the media sun. The same information now is perceived as true and false at the same time, depending on your perspective. The only thing that seems to really count today is the velocity of fascination, scandal, and breaking news. The only thing that seems to really matter is putting the proper spin on the entertainment vector. Fallen icons, countless celebrities, rising stars, the sounds of nostalgia for recycle culture going crazy for its own lack of creativity. Those at the helm of the quantum revolution rise into privileged visibility, the masters of technological platforms most of all. Those most deeply violated by the quantum revolution are brushed away into invisibility. The indigenous, migrants, immigrants, the poor, the powerless, most of Africa, and the homeless most of all. From the point of view of the masters of the quantum universe, their deaths are not grievable, their lives are not memorable, their journeys are not worth recording. So the basic focus of our book, The Quantum Revolution, is this: that we're living in a quantum age in real material time. Artificial intelligence is in the ascendant. Vibrant art is everywhere. Blended bodies, really fast communication, breaking events delivered at the speed of light, bitterly entangled politics, right-wing populism on the rise, mindfulness everywhere, accompanied by really big drops in human consciousness, viral contagions with truth itself seemingly today in real eclipse. Our premise is that when major technological changes slams into the human condition, in the form of things like biogenetics and quantum mechanics, AI, social media, nanotechnology, when these really major technological changes literally do what Marshall McLuhan said 60 years ago, that they begin to perform psychic surgery on the human condition. They literally break into the human nervous system. They fundamentally alter the human sensorium. And they do all this without the use of antiseptics. It's creating pain. And for us, what's left after the fatal implosion is the debris of the death of the social. It's like cosmic dust that gets in our eyes, as life itself today is overwhelmed by the particle blast, riding the storm waves of change and disruption. So, what to do about it as a writer? The quantum revolution explores three theses. First, it begins with the premise that we're living in a fundamentally new reality that does not follow old logic, which we describe as the logic of Euclidean space and time. We begin with the premise that we are riding the quantum wave. The language that is useful to think of is strange to say, is the language of the most advanced science, where the technology companies are getting their most sophisticated concepts from. The concepts of parallel universes, of n-dimensional space, entanglement, viral velocity, virtual vectors, superpositionality, where things can have two appearances at one and the same time. Things can be particle and wave at the same time. For us, what begins as theory and science has now just become concrete, material, bodily, cultural reality in daily life. And we just literally swallow it every day in the form of social media itself. We disappear and we take a heated bath in social media every day, where these things, in fact, come to life itself. That they've been blasted into the very center of society and politics by technologies moving at the speed of light. Reality itself now literally rides the quantum wave. That's our first premise. Our second premise is that technology cannot be understood technologically, only artistically. Artistic imagination has always provided, like an early warning system for big technological changes. It's always ridden the quantum wave. And why? Just for a very practical reason. Because artistic perspective and imagination has always dealt with uncertainty, broken boundaries, fragmentary meanings, enigmatic traces, unfinished endings, traumatic events. It brings into striking visibility stories that have been forced into invisibility. It mourns for that which has been previously considered outside the boundaries of moral grievability. Consequently, for us, it's to artists that we should look for ways of surviving, understanding, and interpreting the new quantum reality. And third, our premise is that the quantum wave has everything in its grip now. The political events and social turbulence, definitely the speed and crash of the economy, the overall pervasive palpable mood of anxiety and fear and panic are all expressions of living now in the vortex of the quantum wave, where technology moves very, very fast, and where the blast of information culture renders things uncertain in detail and definition. Now, the Quantum Revolution as a book, in our own understanding of this book, is what we think of as a new expression of spoken word theory for life in the 21st century. Its influences are, for us, the poetry of rage that is Allen Ginsberg's Hell, Artaud's theater of cruelty, William Burroughs' melancholic vision of Western lands, Kathy Acker's punk aesthetic, Nietzsche's critique of nihilism and the genealogy of morals, artists like Francis Bacon's torqued bodies, and most of all, though, those fabulous gateways to critical engagement and new cosmic understanding that's the indigenous artists of Nadia, Myre, Rebecca Horn, Jackson Two Bears, among many other indigenous artists. Its method is what the French philosopher Guy Debord has called the artistic practice of dérive, the artistic practice of drift. And that is to think with intensity about wherever your imagination, your body takes you, no fixed direction home, everything beautifully random, everything entangled, everything in flux. So just for these working premises, the street science in the quantum revolution is twofold. First, the structure of the book parallels contemporary reality itself. It's divided into a section called particle poetics, and the last section is called wave aesthetics. I mean, quantum reality is where waves and particles exist simultaneously. And we took that premise there and said, well, we'll write a book in which it's particle poetics and it's wave aesthetics at the same time. And the first section, particle poetics, is really stories about the particle blast. The second section, wave aesthetics, is about not just the, being lost in, being immersed in the particle blast, which takes many different forms and everyone will have their own experience of it. But it's also wave aesthetics. It sort of assumes that every particle, every item of information, story that moves with tremendous spin but has virtually no mass is also unknown to itself as part of the bigger wave that's happening in life itself. And we investigate at the end of the book 7 big waves that we think are triggering particular events itself. But let me just speak for a moment about particle blast, because stories from the particle blast are as wide and intense and diverse as life itself. I mean, this section on the particle blast includes reflections on prophetic graffiti, which we found on an abandoned wall, meditations on the importance artistic practice of the London-based group Forensic Architecture as a way of bringing torture and cruelty and into higher visibility, or stories about listening intently really intently to the story, The Poetry of Endurance, that is a writing of Behruz Bouchani's beautiful book called No Friend by the Mountains, an Iranian refugee poet imprisoned offshore in Manus by Australian authorities who refused rights of asylum. And Behruz, to write this book, he's not allowed communication, but he has a phone and he gives the book to outside sources, one small text at a time. He literally uses his phone to write a book and to deliver it to the world itself. It's a beautiful book. Or in Particle Blast, street stories from contemporary politics, stories about kinetics of atrocity, macro bursts and sundogs in global politics, Trump's nostalgia for nostalgia, the phenomena of screen addiction, trouble in the global village, stories about Zoom kids, and stories also about X-raying scavenger culture. But also not just stories about the earth below, but stories about the stars above. I mean, we listen intently to the language of astronomy and astrophysics, stories about blue stragglers, and listening on a winter's night as tears follow from dying stars, stories about jet streams of gravity waves, stories about primordial black holes and dark matter and dark energy, but also stories directly from art. I mean, stories called Scorpio Rising, Art of the Fourth Dimension, Bodies and Runes, stories which link together the works of Louise Bourgeois, Kiki Smith, Rebecca Horn, Nicola Feldman Kiss, interference patterns and memories of the future, and street art as well, the street art of Rock Bay, where we literally Lynn and I walk through Rock Bay and begin to think of this industrial zone of recycling, bleak but really beautiful in its complications itself. And finally, Particle Blast, which we all know, contains a lot of street scenes from technology. We all experience these every day. And our version of this experience is stories like streaming superstring, baby algorithms moving at warp speed, vector zero vector, open source speedrunners. So the first part of the book is Particle Blast and contains these stories. So the second part is wave aesthetics. And for us, the notion of wave aesthetics are key trajectories that run across contemporary reality that capture the big wave patterns that just really crash the contemporary scene, like ecological death, Earth heating up, finite event horizons, from the slaughterhouse, immaterial bodies, the quantum citizen, cold blue sky is the color of melancholy. Now, for each of these themes in wave aesthetics, for us, art takes the lead as an exploration of each fold in reality, which is what as we think of these forms of wave itself. For example, in what we do is we adopt the method of every one of these 7 stories contains like a violent tension within it. They're deliberately constructed to bring artists together as gradient and counter gradient to bring out the greater truth in all the work itself. For example, this wave aesthetic called From the Slaughterhouse sets up a tension between the fantastically brutal X-ray of the human nervous condition that is the art of Francis Bacon, and Kiki Smith's Wolf Girl. Kiki Smith's description of the tortured human body itself. Another wave aesthetic called Violent Event Horizons, that's Nadia Myre's brilliant Autopsy of the Future, that is her visual rendition of the Indian Act, brushed against the violent visual scenes of the brutalist, highly prophetic work of Edward Kienholz in his work on the 5 cars that come together in a dance of death and macabre torture itself. Or art with the density of a black hole. That's the artistic imagination of Jackson Tumir's remix identity and time tunneling. And mixed with the art of Kiko Hart's data moshing, or Adrienne Matthews's In the Future Where Everything, but also Nikita Feldman Kiss, beautiful intimacy and memory for a time of lonely itself. So the wave aesthetics is really just art, and really is thinking of the larger patterns of the quantum reality culture within which we live and uses artists as gradient and countergradient at every point to lead the way itself. So I would just say that in conclusion, the quantum revolution is everyday life in the 21st century. It's a time where everything's uncertain, unpredictable, hangs in the balance. We're caught up in a stream of events like a particle blast that has us in its grip. It's fascinating, it's anxiety-provoking, it's deeply troubling, sometimes tedious. But for all of us, traditional things endure. There's injustice everywhere, there's massive class inequities that persist. The suffering of migrants pushed to the edge of invisibility is just a commonplace in culture itself. Right-wing populism fueled by anger, rage, and rancor are on the rise globally. And the militarism of empires, enthusiastically supported by the always welcoming media chorus, is everywhere. But at the same time, the deep cycles of nature, of fire, earth, water, and air, surround us. There's the rising and setting of the sun. There's the rhythm of tides and ocean deeps. There's the everyday theater of listening to the intimations of the primal, that the land that is screaming for existence itself. I mean, the quantum reality just begins with something very concrete. And that is that we are living today and hurling at hyper speed into a split reality. There's artifice on the surface, it's moving fast, but there's also the stubborn facticity of earth, fire, water, and air everywhere. And the quantum revolution as a book is situated right in the midst of those two, listening intently to the stubborn facticity and scream of protest of earth, fire, air, and water. And at the same time, it attempts to run as fast as it can and move as fast as it can and be as creative as it can in the language of artifice itself, the language of technology itself. So with that, I think I would just turn it over to Lynn. That's the, these are the premises of the book. So Lynn.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you. And thank you, Peter. This is great to take part in this. This book was the result of a collaboration of ideas and storytelling between myself as a photographer and writer and two theorists, Arthur and David, which, as you can imagine, resulted in intense and invigorating conversations. Art was the subject and the storyline technology of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In many ways, the author's words were directed and enhanced by the artist's paintings, sculptures, and photographs in the book. Most of the artists featured here, by the way, are women. The author set up a dance between the images and their words, evocative, complicated, and poetic, speaking to the entangled world we live in today, and to science and technology. In our book, Arthur writes that a revolution is in the myriad of stories, of drawings, murals, creations, all with their unique experiences that populate the quantum zone. Each of us on the wave of creation, each of us a particle that carries the future, the quantum revolution. While writing the book, we found ourselves walking and biking the streets of Victoria where we live. We discovered a fantastic art project Arthur mentioned already called The Hands of Time, a series of 12 small bronze sculptures evoking West Coast history, hidden amongst the landscape throughout the city. We were surprised and excited at the quality of the graffiti we found on the back walls of warehouses and alongside abandoned railway tracks, on office buildings in the downtown district, and security fences and plywood along the sidewalks. I photographed the images, sensitive to the origin and complexity of the stories behind each one. Searching for context, we wanted to know who placed them there, why, and what story did they tell. Art is often autobiographical, as was mine in the story Hoping for the Best and Mourning the Rest. In this story about my journey with cancer, I took photographs of my body. You'll see two photographs of me, one in color, the other in black and white, as I lay in the warmth of my bath, bubbles surrounding my body. I saw a body ravaged by cancer, body parts removed, radiated, injected during chemotherapy with powerful and poisonous drugs, desperately grasping onto technology as its savior. While the algorithms might report an 85, maybe 90% chance of survival past 5 years, I was clinging to the hope it would be 100% chance. The viewer, though, without that story, would see something else. In another story, which we titled Blasts of Graffiti for Life on the Run, we see the powerful graffiti covering the walls of the warehouses off the beaten track in Victoria, the waste found in Rock Bay, an industrial area of our city, and the carving on a granite boulder on the beach of our small community park in Cadborough Bay, where dogs and children romp and play. Contrast that with the faded images painted on tattered panels, blowing in the wind, barely hanging from the roofs of those same warehouses and begging the question, why were they there? Research told us they stood as reminder of the tragic murder years ago of 14-year-old Rena Verk by fellow students, her beaten body left on the water's edge of the gorge nearby. Those walls and panels were alive, their stories fading under the sun, while hidden deep within the paint, among the lines, were stories of lives lost, lives living, futures told. In the story on graffiti art and savagery, we end with an excerpt of my poem, which reads, "And so Rena lives on, somewhere, somehow, some way, among the wires, the blue light, where connectors carry her until we cut the lines. Cut those lines and the world belongs to you, who, in the little house down the road, the highway, the gravel paths, to begin again, to write, to scratch, to scribble, who will cut the lines? Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the global Godnet my soul to keep." These have been a few of my contributions as a photographer, writer, and poet to the quantum revolution. And so, as a photographer, I record the story. The writer and the reader tell their own.
Thank you, Lynn. There are these amazing photographs and depictions of performances and also just, paintings reproduced in the book. And I was hoping that we could look at some images and the both of you could talk a little bit about it, because there is such a rich collection throughout the book. Let me see if I can get a screen share up here. This is actually a photo of Jackson Two Bears on the cover.
Yeah, I've known Jackson Two Bears for a long time. When I first came to the University of Victoria, 2003, Jackson was one of the first persons I met, and Jackson worked with me, and we set up I had a project going, Civic Center for Technology and Culture, and Jackson was one of the people just absolutely instrumental in getting it going and running all the new media art projects involved with that. But before then, and Jackson could do it with such like profound skill and eloquence, really, aesthetic eloquence, because Jackson is already an accomplished video artist, one of Canada's most prominent video artists. And as an Indigenous artist, his video artist is always involved in doing two things. One, pushing intently into the language of music and technology to really do remix identity, to mix screenal images and sounds with the sounds of, what I've called in my talk, the intimations of deprival itself, listening intently to what has been lost in the apocalyptic violence that's been done to Indigenous cultures itself, and having a sense of the dirge, but also of the strength of mutual solidarity in the sounds of his music itself. So myself, Jackson Two Bears has always been an immensely admirable artist and like a real signpost of possibilities for new critical aesthetic strategies. This Jackson Two Bears, I think he's performing Iron Tomahawks in this piece. It's a great piece. Oh. And Jackson will be speaking in a little bit, actually.
So this is a very powerful image.
Yeah, and it's Rebecca Belmore's, it's a piece, profoundly powerful piece, Rebecca Belmore. The Quantum Revolution, the book starts on the third or fourth page of the book. It begins with this image itself, which, just sort of struck me as, as painful scar across the back of the woman and sutures. And it's really just based, Rebecca's also going to be on the panel that comes next. And she'll tell the story much better than I will. But this reflects, I believe her experience of the knowledge of this was based on the true event, Indigenous woman's having a surgeon operate on her back in the western town, Winnipeg, I think. And for the amusement of nurses and doctors gather around them, he takes 2 beads, mimicking mimicking indigenous art, and sews them into the suture itself. Everyone gets a very good laugh. And it's just, there's the most bleakest form of, cold-hearted racism itself. And what I've always liked about this piece, just as a form of, profound evocative art, is that, they're back for us, but, it's not, it sort of breaks the gaze itself. It just draws you quickly from the position of the gaze into just depth involvement with the notion of, racism, which is directed against an indigenous woman itself. And at the same time as it does that, it's not simply about suffering, it's also about a sign of resurgence itself. It's a sign about mutual strength. And, with Rebecca, I'd like to talk about what I see in all of her work. In 1181, Black Cloud, Wave Sound, it's just this, fantastic art of duality itself. It's why, for myself, indigenous artists today, having already experienced the apocalypse, are really trustworthy guides to methods of survival in contemporary culture. So this is Fringe. Lynn, do you want to speak about this?
No, I'll let you speak about it. Again, these are some of the images that we came across, along the lonely and abandoned railroad tracks, posted on the back of the warehouses in Victoria. And they were just fascinating and very professional pieces. We could never find out who the artists were and what they meant by it, but just intrigued with, the bats, what looks like the red moon and the machinery, very futuristic, but just fascinating nonetheless. I think there are other pictures coming that you'll see that just make you ask questions. Why are these artists there? And what's even more fascinating is how, 8 months later, these pieces are gone. Someone else has painted over top of them. So always fascinating pieces along these walls.
Yeah, and in this particular piece for us, for myself at least, was really interesting because I thought, wow, this is where Homeric mythology has gone to be. I found it, not in a book this time. I found it on a graffiti on a wall. It's really an apocryphal story of the end of the world itself. So you'll see by these various pieces. It contains violences and also contains promises, and it's really deeply prophetic. It's like a signpost to the future, graffiti on a wall as you're biking along. Yes. It's the woman with the leash on a tiger, powerful, apocryphal writing itself. It's scenes of like it's a, apocalypse scene from the future, the future says now, actually. Nadia Myre, this Indian act, is a phenomenally important piece. I mean, Indian act in Canada has been used to colonize indigenous people and sort of impose, white settler colonial logic on indigenous peoples itself. And here's Nadia Myre rising as a resurgent indigenous artist and really, beginning to take the Indian act and begin to tell it, to embroider it with beads itself and to take over the setting of the act itself. This is a phenomenal piece. And Nadia Myre, again, with Rebecca Belmore, is going to be on the session which comes up next itself. And this is the Indian, she'll talk about it better, of course. And this is the Indian act itself. And the SCAR project. And again, Nadia is going to describe this better, but this SCAR project really is important for the quantum revolution because it sets the emotional tone for the quantum revolution. I mean, Nadia will describe it better, but the SCAR project is a trauma, but it's a collective meditation on trauma. Any number of people and women have been invited to do their own SCAR project, oftentimes ending with punctures in the canvas and sewings, etc. But it turns out, collectively, the whole project is also solidarity, about solidarity and celebration, and doing what Judith Butler said, which is to say, work through trauma by going directly into it. And that's exactly what Nadia Myre's Scar Project has done. Again, just a phenomenally important and, emotionally telling, captivating art project to us itself. It's a critically engaged art at its best. Lynn, do you want to?
No, again, this is one of the surprises, brass sculptures that we found in the landscape of Victoria. Surprising, stunning, beautiful, just a little surprise. Arthur?
Yes. Yeah, so the previous two people, like Nadia Myre's work and Rebecca Belmore, reflect on those pieces, really influenced the writing of the quantum revolution. But so did this work itself. And this work is discovered in the most, I was actually sitting there waiting for Lynn, and I looked at my feet and I thought, wow, what is this carving at my feet? I literally, these are quiet pieces. They just go into the landscape itself. And so with Lynn, we immediately researched, found out what was going on our bikes, and then rode the whole shoreline of Victoria, searching out every one of these pieces. And it's done by a phenomenally great artist, Cristo Brazili. And she done 12 of these pieces, and all of which depict specific historical incidents that are happening. Teacups, camoose bowls, the paddle. I think an image is going to come up showing where ships would, anchor to the shore itself. And the book, apartment stairwell, you look up and it quietly has this beautiful sculpture of a book about the department store itself, and it tells you about the history of the store itself. And I thought, well, this is art which just simply brings, it's ground truthing the history of the city. And just as much as like Jackson Tuber's in the next session, I believe we'll hopefully talk about his work, is also ground truthing through virtual technology, indigenous history, which has just simply been pushed brutally into invisibility itself. And Crystal's work does exactly the same for a different reason. She ground truths lost histories and erased memories. And she does it, I think, for myself, what's most compelling about this, she does it in ways which are, they don't call attention to itself. It's art which is really quiet. It's art which is in and of the landscape itself. And, which then just, sort of edifies things and begins to sparkle your imagination as you begin to reflect on it, particularly as you follow the whole track, the 12 artists. And it's exciting discovery after exciting discovery. So it's one of the chapters on the book. Kiki Smith's Body Trailing Blood. And I really like Kiki Smith's work a lot, because Kiki Smith, will present a woman's body that is not the body of the male gaze. I mean, she presents the body that's menstruating, blood flows from it. There's piss, there's love. It's, it is the body which has come to life itself. And Kiki Smith is, I think, really one of the really fabulous artists, because she presents the body not like Francis Bacon does, where Francis Bacon x-rays the body and brings out its distortions. I think Kiki Smith brings out the humanity of bodies and the solidarity and strength and ultimate fragility and vulnerability of the bodies. And, just thinking about the work of Kiki Smith and Louise Bourgeois and Rebecca Horn has had a huge influence in the writing of the quantum revolution, certainly plays an important part in the book itself. And as does many women's art. And the art would do, for whatever reason, in the book is predominantly by women artists for the most part, with some exceptions, of course. Blue Lake, Kiki Smith again. And again, where the body, the face just gets diffracted, showing the tensions which are that every one of us is not an individual self. Every one of us is multiple selves. And this, for myself, is one of the most powerful expressions of the multiplicity of human personality and of human being. That's Kiki Smith again. Jackson Two Bears in performance. Yeah, this again is Cristo Brazili's Hands of Time. This was very hard to find, actually. This is into a rock. It's down a place in a harbor where ships don't come in anymore, really. and where it's sort of an obscure location itself, historically correct, but obscure location, and brings you back to naval history and human hands.
Lynn, did you have any comments on this?
No.
Lynn.
Oh dear, I guess I have to speak to this one. This is one of the photos I had mentioned about while going through my journey with cancer. I took this picture sitting in the tub and was mesmerized by the bubbles, and then it was the depth of pain that you go through when something like this happens, and it just struck me that there was the warmth of the bubbles, the pink, the white, and then looking into the depths, you know how deep the pain is that you go through with the fear that is this cancer gone? Will it come back? How are things? And yet the warmth of the water was somewhat soothing. The fear looking into the depths of the water, a little bit frightening. And that's what this image is about.
Yeah, and this goes back to the apocryphal vision of the present or the future, raise the dead, which is part of the graffiti on the wall that we wrote on. It's a whole essay on graffiti. This just seeing this graffiti and the mythological story that it was telling just really had a tremendous, it really sparked our imaginations, and certainly sparked my imagination of the power of graffiti, actually, in the form of transgressive forms of art, both invade private property, or they can be found on the sides of garbage cans. It's like what Adorno said when he came to America, that in America you can find metaphysics on the side in a garbage can. And I think graffiti art's not like that, of course, but this was this unbelievably stunning imagery, an apocryphal tale of humanity and the end of humanity, is found literally on a lonely, abandoned wall that you otherwise would walk by. It's like, wow, like this enigmatic pointer to the future. And it's transient, it's vulnerable. As Lynn said, this has all been, last time I was there, it's all been painted over, and other creative arts taken this place. So, yeah, Kiki Smith, this is untitled. And again, the vulnerability and humanity of the human body itself in the work of Kiki Smith. Kiki Smith plays an important part in the quantum revolution, as does the equally phenomenal work of Louise Bourgeois and Rebecca Horns. These are Nicola Filmonkas as well. We have an essay on them, and more than an essay, the spirit of the psychic spirit of the work just pervades the text as a whole. Yeah, this is Rebecca Horns, and this is from a performance, right? Piano is raised upside down. Sounds are going to be discordant sounds are coming out of this piano itself, and the world begins to turns beautifully chaotic, and normal perspective is simply altered. In terms of, this is really an important performance piece by Rebecca Horn. And again, we're back to apocryphal tales, and the beauty of this is just, to me, this is just amazing that you could have work that was just so fundamentally interesting and in its own right discordant and beautifully chaotic, and so predictive of the future and ominous, and it's perfectly transient and fluid. And the quantum revolution, this text, we pay lots of attention to works like these, actually, because they're very much like reality. Yeah. Lynn, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. These, there might be some others. This are incredible. This is in Rock Bay, Victoria. And these are just, for us, just incredibly beautiful images of indigenous cosmology. This sensitive, beautiful, empathic understanding of fire, earth, air, and water, of a new relationship to the land. Now, these aren't in an art gallery. and they're not honored in any way. These are pieces on pieces of plywood. And the pieces of plywood, there's maybe 15 of them. And they are there for just a very functional purpose. They're just like filler, from the point of view of developers, to hide the site, hide from passerbys and cars of a remediation site that's going on. So the city came up with this idea that it would develop this project, and Darning Gates and Butch Dick organized it and did the images, and then young indigenous artists did the painting, I believe, of all these individual pieces. And they are absolutely stunning. And last time I was there, the pieces have come down, they're in the process of being disappeared again. They're transient. There's beautiful spectral, magnificent images of indigenous cosmology are, just transient in culture itself and not honored. These are not in galleries. They're not particularly honored, but they're pieces which have such an honor to themselves. It was such a privilege to look at these, to think about them, and to begin to write about them. And again, they're incorporated into a chapter in the quantum revolution, a reflection on these pieces.
And our hope is that they've found a good place to be hung.
Yes. Yeah. Again, this is cedar, the red cedar. Jackson again. Yeah.
I think we're done with this.
Yeah. So just the book itself has 58 different images. University of Toronto Press was kind enough to print them all in really nice colors. So there's good. And the reflection in the art book is not simply reflection art. It is really imbued as much as it can with an artistic spirit.
So we've gotten some questions in the chat.
Sure.
And I'd like to see if we can start at the top, where we have Ricardo Dominguez, who's going to be joining us later. Says, gracias, Arthur, Lynn, and David. The quantum politics of undead media keeps us already spinning in the media blast. Thanks for the diagramming the waves. What is the difference between the panic and frenzy of the 80s, the hysterias of the digital bodies, and the implosive states of post 9/11? Are they echoes of each other, or does each event differ in specific terms, or are they entangled deeply at the quantum event horizon with little difference between each of the wave aesthetics or particle politics now and then?
Well, that's a pretty packed question, actually. Yeah, but let me just take to the panic. We wrote actually in the 1980s, we wrote a book called, David and I wrote the Panic Encyclopedia. Panic hamburgers, panic sex, panic almost everything. And in retrospect, I think the Panic Encyclopedia was just the beginning of things. It was the beginning of the digital revolution. And panic was about, well, what happens when the stability of culture is just sort of undergoes a fantastic speed up, and everything begins to have multiple meanings and can be flipped into its reverse meaning quite easily and stuff. So we wrote a whole panic encyclopedia, taking a very traditional format, the encyclopedia, and wrote a panic encyclopedia in which, picking up on any number of symptomatic signs of culture, we began to write panic theses about them. And that, I think, was simply symptomatic of what's to come. The quantum revolution comes along, 25 or so, 30 years later. And the tendencies which are first detected in the Panic Encyclopedia are now really solidified and moving at the speed of very fast technologies, which move according to really a new logic. The tendencies that are depicted in the Panic Revolution have just sort of entered culture as its permanent features, and we've become accustomed to them. And that's why this time we write about entanglement, the movement of fast vectors, the randomness of culture, what it means to live in a stochastic universe, etc.
I'm sorry, Bob. Bob asks, Barrington Nevitt came up with the word wavicle. Have you heard of this word?
No, which word is this?
So this is in reference to, he used the word wavicle in his books. Barrington often spoke at Concordia in the 80s and 90s, sponsored by Dennis Murphy. Bob also asks, have you ever met Dennis?
Yeah, Dennis Murphy, yeah, of course. Yes, and think very highly of him as well.
Yeah, so I guess this was in reference to,
But Barrington never, I didn't hear speak in wavicle. That's such a lovely term, actually.
yeah.
An intimation of the future.
Okay, let's see.
Except,
Michael has a question. With two questions. My first question is drawn from the notion of nostalgia for nostalgia. I was wondering if you could speak more about nostalgia and its effects on political life, how imaginary times and space affect everyday life.
Yeah. Well, Nostalgia for Nostalgia is an essay on Trump, on ex-President Trump. And it's written at a time when Trump was still down in Florida. It's really just, but had like the real seduction of a falling, which is pretty evident today. Nostalgia for Nostalgia is about what happens to people, to many people, when under the stress of really rapid change, the breakdown of borders, and not simply national borders, but the borders of identity, the borders of the identity on the basis of gender and sexuality and race. When life really does get porous and begin to leak and things begin to shift and get fluid, panic reactions set in. And I think one of the panic reactions of contemporary times is what we call not simply nostalgia, but nostalgia for the feeling of nostalgia. Nostalgia for, in the United States, would be for MAGA, for making America great again. Nostalgia for a time in which males were at the top of the pinnacle. You know, it's the nostalgia for, you know, the privileged position of what another book I call the hysterical male, actually, which is a really driving force in contemporary culture and leads to lots of anger, rage, and resentment. And at the same time, a real panic reaction as traditional male egos are broken into and national borderlines are seemingly violated. You know, panic sets in. It's a really dangerous moment because fascism comes directly out of this. So I don't see nostalgia for nostalgia being a benign political phenomenon. Nostalgia for nostalgia is the driving force of contemporary right-wing politics in many countries of the world today, in Canada as much as any other country.
The second question was, how do you feel about AI art?
I do not feel at this point very highly about it because it's still in its, well, that's not really true. Some of which I have seen, I don't get too much in its representational phase. It's almost using art as a gimmick of a machine that can produce things. But sometimes you find AI art, as I saw at the Vancouver Art Gallery, which is really quite stunning, actually, because it uses AI to push up the notion of the porousness of the human body to its point of extreme. And at the point of extreme, interesting things begin to happen. They're quite unpredictable itself. And I thought that was a real aesthetic breakthrough and was really, you know, pretty, it was so wonderful to witness this, actually. So I think AR art will follow the track of digital art. It'll be representational, sort of reflective of the technologies, euphoric, blah, blah, all those things. But at some point, the artists will actually get to work and the artists will begin to infect AI art with diseases. They'll infect it with vulnerability, problems of human compassion, slowness, system breakdowns, and static. And at that point, interesting art will begin to emerge, as I'm sure it already has. And Jackson Two Bears, again, who's heading up a huge project called Abundant Intelligences, involving many indigenous artists from many countries of the world, together with MIT. This afternoon is going to have lots to tell us about AI art. That will be a profound education, actually. That's the beginning of real AI.
Well, we're coming to the top of the hour and it's time to wrap this session up, but we will have another session coming up. Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Lynn. And thanks to all of you for joining us Ever grateful. Really, really excited about the second session. As we said, like Rebecca Belmore, Ricardo Dominguez, Jackson Two Bears, Nadia Myre are going to be joining us. So please come join us for that. As always, our events are made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through our event programming, our public outreach, and all geared towards encouraging deep literacy. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you.